relationships that have longevity. That's really what we need more than anything right now. So we'll spend a little time to talk about how we define strong long-term engagement. We'll talk about some tips about how to develop long-lasting relationships that are really rooted in rapport and trust in a career that can span decades. So why does meaningful engagement matter? I think transactional recruiting was effective for an extraordinarily long time. Skill sets weren't as nuanced, competition wasn't as fierce, technology wasn't as advanced, and recruiting became very much a spigot that you could turn on and off, right? You need people, you start to ramp up. You don't need folks, you ramp down. But industries have evolved. The ability for companies to be able to source candidates has expanded at an unbelievable rate. So we need to nurture the folks that we're interested in hiring. And that's become so much more prevalent again in recent years, as it was prior to all the technology that we had when we were all still getting resumes via fax, and probably just dated myself there. So why does it matter, right? Ghosting sucks. It's one of the most often cited complaints of candidates and truly for recruiters alike. We've all been ghosted ourselves. It's become far too commonplace, right? And so again, the work that we do isn't transactional in nature anymore. There's just too many candidates that have options. Word travels fast when people feel forgotten. And people are looking for a level of psychological safety, of continuity, things that will continue to further their personal development, their professional growth. So when you look at something as simplistic as, say, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, psychological safety is a big component there, right? Knowing what to expect. How do you achieve your goals? Are you in a place where you feel trusted and valued? And they're integral parts for any human in their development, right? And becoming this sort of ideal version of themselves and who they see themselves to be. The role that we play in that really, really matters. Communication throughout the whole recruitment process is so important for us. And delivering on what you say you're going to deliver on is more important for your brand and for your company's brand more now than maybe ever. So empathy and psychological safety, right? So that one of the strongest tools in our arsenal, and not just as recruiters, but as humans, is the ability that we have to express empathy. And each person that we talk to has their own ambitions, they have their own goals, they have a vision of what they want in their life. And in addition to that, they also bring a persona away from outside of work that influences those same hopes, those ambitions, the goals, at least to some degree, right? There's always a blend of the persona somebody is at work as well as outside of work, whether or not we choose to sort of see that up front. So that regular, frequent, but also candid communication, that creates that level of familiarity and predictability. And that's central to this psychological safety that everybody's looking for. And we see that both as recruiters as well as candidates ourselves. When people know what to expect from somebody, there's comfort in that. There's a psychological comfort in that. And the offspring of that is the trust that is built from it. And that is the foundation for any relationship, right? Trust and transparent communication are the foundation for any job, any friendship, any marriage, any relationship with children. We need to trust what that other party is saying and what they're telling us is true, and vice versa. So when we say we're going to commit to something, we need to be able to follow through on that. The next piece of this is, AI, right? I think this has become such a central piece to what we all talk about in probably the last 2 years or so. And I think everybody's worried to some degree that AI is coming for their job, and it is. And I'm just going to hard pause on that right there because it is going to come for, and it's going to come for certain parts, but it's probably the parts that you hate doing already that are repetitious, that are just sort of ad nauseum tasks that you have to do Monday through Friday. So the way to insulate yourself for that is to double down on this human interaction piece, right? The human interaction of our work is something that AI can simply just not do, at least not yet. I don't know what the future is going to hold. I'm not going to be so bold as to predict that. But I think the human interaction piece is the one piece that's not going to be automated by something tomorrow. So, when we look at the overall candidate workflow and the experience and that life cycle of things, it's not just about, are you human and are you engaging with somebody once they've finally shown interest? Are you engaging when they're ready to take an offer? It really starts at the very beginning, right? So it starts with that initial contact. You have to think about if your messaging that you're sending out to somebody, does it sound canned? If you have you gone through all the possible avenues of their experience or their public persona that's out there, right? All of those things that are available on the web. In order to siphon out that information that you can use in that initial outreach, we have to be creative, right? We're not just going to copy and paste the last 100 emails that we sent out. Are you looking to find the common ground, those sort of soft icebreakers, or something else that you can use to capture their attention within the 30 to 60 seconds that they might read that message? And it is a lot of work. It's a lot of research, but it's the overall glue that really holds things together for the remainder of the time that you're interacting with that person now and now in the future. So we want to make sure we're looking for things in a profile that you can really showcase in your messaging, right? And being very specific, calling out something specific that you found really puts a hook into it to realize that the person shows that you see them as a person and not just their code, not just their degree, or, how amazingly cool your company culture is. That that first call with somebody, and yes, that is technically an interview, but it's also very much a conversation. So this is really where the relationship begins to take shape, right? We have to have this genuine level of curiosity about their background, why they made the moves that they did, what their journey has been like, what are the good, the bad, the ugly, that they've experienced. How do we discover what motivates them, what those goals are, right? That psychological safety for somebody is to make sure that they can eventually get to the goals that they've set for themselves. And we really need to understand that by digging into all aspects of their background. I think one of the things that I tend to really sort of drill it down into when I talk to somebody, once I've got a handle on their background, their experience, sort of their interest level, I want to know what nirvana state looks like for them. I really want to understand, what today looks like, but paint me the picture of tomorrow. And I think part of that is, you know, asking that question, but then leaving some breathing room for them to answer that and ask some questions to you as well, and really sort of get this two-way street conversation going as you talk to them. When we talk about feedback and follow up, um, when we hit on somebody great, we really want to ensure that we're laying out what the steps ahead look like. You have this great initial conversation. What does next look like? Nobody wants to walk through this process in the dark. And so we want to give them an idea of what the next steps are, what can they expect from you, and when are you going to follow up with them, right? And ensure that when we say we're going to follow up, we actually do so. So, if I tell somebody, hey, everything looks great, I'm going to talk to so and so manager, I'm going to get some feedback for you, I'll get you an update by next Monday. I need to commit to that. And sometimes, because the world that we live in is not perfect, I don't have that update. And that's okay. The solution for that is to just drop that note to say, hey, my update is I don't have an update for you yet. Give me another 24, 48, 72 hours, whatever the case is there. The point being with this is that I've kept my end of the bargain and I've let them know that, hey, when I tell you I'm going to do something, I'm going to follow through on it, and you can expect that I'm going to do that. When we talk about the feedback piece of it, we sometimes have to deliver hard feedback. I've lost count of the amount of candidates that I thought were just such a perfect fit. It was going to be a slam dunk, and it doesn't go the way you think it's going to go, and you have to deliver that hard feedback. And we need to do that in a meaningful way. And I will, as always, sort of insert the caveat here of deliver the feedback that you're able to based on what your company policy is. And if you're not able to deliver sort of extended, detailed feedback, that's okay. Just explain why you're not able to do that. And I think people are human and they understand, where we have limitations. But if you are able to do that, give them something constructive that aids them in the future, whether it's a tip on their interview style or questions they could have answered a little bit better. That level of candor there is going to enhance the level of trust between you and that person because you were real with them. You weren't just sending the thanks for making the time. We don't really have anything for you right now, or they're going to move on to somebody else. Okay, I get that, but you can also be a little bit more candid within that conversation with the person. I think what we realize is that over the course of a career that spans decades, we are going to eventually cross paths with these people again. And so, keeping those bridges intact for you to be able to cross later on is sort of priority number one. And I put in here the uglies, and I want to clarify what that means, right? The uglies sort of matter when you're talking about leveling and you're talking about compensation early on, right? Like no company is apples to apples. Compensation varies widely by companies. Um, and you should be candid about talking about leveling and compensation early. So, for example, if you can't hit the mark that somebody needs to be at with compensation, don't be afraid to have that candid question and answer with them for, is the role or the compensation going to be too big of a step backward for them? They may be willing to make some sacrifices to increase their scope, increase their scale, to get out of a toxic environment. But ask those questions candidly and then just sit back and listen. Let them talk it through live with you. But also reconfirm if it's really something that they are open to and hear what they're saying, digest that, regurgitate that back to make sure you really understood what they were asking for. But it'll help to really uncover more about their motivations. It'll show that you are more concerned with more than just putting a butt in a seat. So if you truly can't make the compensation work or the leveling is just not going to be a fit, it's too much of a bridge for them to cross over, at least you've respected them enough not to waste their time in going through a process that's going to have very little chance of success. There's nothing worse than a candidate devoting 5 to 7 hours of their time to go through a whole interview process only for us to come back to them with something that they look at and say, well, what the hell is this? We want to make sure we're coming back with things that matter. So having those conversations early on are going to be the things that really sort of build that trust to say, hey, this person really understood who I was, what I needed, and what I could make work and what I couldn't make work. Checking in and sort of staying connected with somebody is truly a long haul type of experience, right? We are not going to hit pay dirt every single time we talk to somebody, and anybody that tells you that that's the case is abjectly lying to you. Sometimes it's about timing, and sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. And when that timing is right, it's imperative that you have this ability to know who to go back to and why, right? What isn't a match today might be tomorrow. The roles that you don't have anything that's a fit for them today, you might have 20 of those in January when new headcount drops. So having some dependable strategies for ensuring that you can go back to these folks when you need to, those are going to be the things that increase your chances for success over time. And the tools that you use to employ those strategies, those are all sitting at our fingertips already today. So what are those tools, what are those strategies that we're going to use, right? We're inundated with technology. We've all got sort of a core set of tech that we use every day. We're all got 12,000 things stashed in a tab of browsers that we haven't gotten to, and maybe between Christmas and New Year's we'll get to it, but probably not. But we have to use the things that are sitting right in front of us, right? And so you're worried about AI taking your job. Let's sort of flip the script on that a little bit. And how about we start infusing AI and some systems into our workflows, right? There's too much that happens over the course of 3, 6, 12 months for us to remember who we're supposed to reach back out to. How are you supposed to remember all the details of a 30-minute conversation that you had in February of earlier this year? And who had that weird skill set that you now desperately need three of, right? So you can set reminders in your ATS and your CRM, right? But you have to note what you talked about. What are those things that you need to remember when you reach back out? Did they just have a kid and they were on maternity leave or paternity leave? Did they just start a new job that they're not 100% sure, but they want to give it 6 months and see how it goes? We're about to get into the period of time of year where people are going to start wanting to wait for the March cash bonus, or they've got a big vesting of RSUs coming up before they make any kind of move. Those are the things that we want to put into our systems to help jog your memory. Those are going to be your advantage when you go back later on with a very pointed check-in to say, hey, how did the resting go? Are you still ready to take a look around? Did they give you more stock? Are you going to stick around there for a little more? How's the baby going? Did you have a boy? Did you have a girl? Those types of things that sort of tap into the psyche of the person that you're reaching out to. You also want to take a look at your system. Does it have its sort of tagging taxonomy, right? Can you notate specific skills or experience that somebody has so that you can do a quick search of those later on? That way, when you need that like logistics systems administrator who knows a bit of Python or a nurse who's willing to go travel to Idaho, you have that information sitting right at your hands to be able to go back and say, hey, I know the last time we talked, you couldn't do New York, but I've got a great opportunity that's in Idaho, and I know you're right outside southern Idaho. You can do that. I have a very firm rule with this, and the reason I sort of stress this is because one, as I get older, my memory isn't as great, but I have a firm rule to never remember anything that I can write down and be reminded of later. That's what my systems are for. That's what my Evernote is for. I don't have to remember all the details when I can put it somewhere to have it easily accessible for me later on. But in those notes, call out the specifics in your notes, right? So beyond those sort of high level things, what else was interesting? What did you have in common with that person? What were the nuggets that they were really keen to share with you on that call that they seemed to put a little bit more emphasis on than others? Those are the things you're going to want to really dig back into. And going back to the psychological aspect of this, there's this sort of hit of dopamine that's activated when someone has a personal connection to someone else. And one of the ways of doing that is when you've remembered something very specific that they told you. And often people will kind of, gonna blink twice and say, I can't believe you remembered that. And again, that's something that you have sitting right in front of you. We just have to use all the tools available to us to do that. Beyond our own systems, though, we have to stay aware and stay informed, right? And there's little tiny things that we can do that help us do that. You can, make sure you reconnect with somebody on a regular cadence, set a reminder for it. Even if you don't have a capability in your system, put it on your calendar. Drop a line every so often, even if that's just 6 or 12 months check in, say, hey, it's been a while since we talked. How are things going at XYZ company? Stay top of mind with them. You can follow their posts on LinkedIn, right? You can actually set alerts so that when that person posts new activity, you get notified about it. There's a lot of noise on any kind of platform like a LinkedIn or something like that. And you can sort of filter through that to make sure you get notified about the things that you want. It allows you to do things like comment on their posts and stay engaged or share content. And the same is true on the opposite end. It allows them to make sure that they can see and share your content and stay engaged with you. And when they're having that bad day and they see your profile come up, it remembers like, oh yeah, hey, I spoke to Pete and he was really good about remembering that I had X, Y, and Z going on. You follow some news about the company, right? You want to be aware when there's major leadership changes, CTO leaves, whole C-suite leaves, or there are layoffs, right? We went through a scenario a couple of years ago where it was one layoff after another. And these are sort of the ideal times for that flyby, that drop in, right? Hey, I saw that, saw that there was a layoff, there was 20%. Are you good? Are you safe? Did you get affected? Maybe they're not affected, but because you had that good initial conversation with them, if you kept the relationship going, they'll say, no, I'm not, but here's three people that are on my team that got affected that were great, and you should really talk to them. You want to keep in touch with folks too as they go through these changes. A lot of companies are going through return to office changes. Not everybody wants to go back to an office. I don't ever want to see an office 5 days a week again. But I think we have to really sort of take into consideration that this is going to be life changing for a lot of folks. And when you have that scenario pop up, just drop a line and say, hey, are you good? How's it going? I think the one other thing that we know people will do, and this has become particularly evident in the last decade or so, people are bound to let the world know what's going on with them, right? Even the smallest little updates. It's made it so much easier for us to keep in touch with folks, A, because we have the technology, and B, because people are doing so much more and they're willing to share. So, how do we humanize that, right? We have to make that time to reconnect, right? Just because we're using tech to remind us of things, we still have to stay human. That check-in needs to sound human. That check-in needs to incorporate some of the personal things that you talked about before. Again, going back to the initial messaging, it continues with the follow-ups. Like make sure the consent, the communications that you send out, the messages you send out, they sound like you. Bring your authentic self to that initial conversation, to the additional touch points, and that is going to sort of change the way people will see you and interact with you. And if the timing's off, that's okay. It's never, you're never always going to hit it right on the mark, but find out when it's good to check in again. Is 3 months a good time? Is 6 months a good time? Do you want to tell me to pound sand and you'll let me know when you'll get back to me? That's fine too. But leave the door open that, hey, I'll touch base in 6 months, but if anything changes beforehand, just drop me a line and we'll pick up the phone and we'll talk. Things change unexpectedly. We want to just anticipate that. You don't lose anything by setting aside 15 minutes to chat and catch up with somebody. You're going to be more likely to have them be willing to share information with you that's beneficial, whether that's just life updates for them or curiosity about what's going on at your company or the referrals that are going to come through that. People will refer people to those that they trust. And that's something that we need to keep in mind as we continue through that downward path. So what that looks like in practice, I want to share a couple of examples with this. I didn't know we're coming up on time, so I want to kind of go through these and get us back on track. The first example of this is somebody that I connected with close to 20 years ago, and I was still a baby agency recruiter. Um, and we were able to get through a final round with a client that I had at the time, and we didn't get to the offer. That was disappointing because it was one of those scenarios where I figured it was a slam dunk candidate. But we had a very candid conversation about the feedback and I think where they could improve down the road, things they could sort of tweak in their storytelling. And we managed to stay in touch. And every couple of years, maybe every 2 to 3 years or so, we sort of touch base with one another. Um, and it goes different ways. I initiate it sometimes, he initiates it sometimes. And given that my focus has shifted a little bit over the years, I haven't had much that I can hire him for, but we've had probably in the last 4 or 5 years, 2 or 3 of those conversations have been a little bit more of that sort of career focus and like, what am I going to do here? I'm thinking about pivoting here and having that sort of candid one-off conversation about what's happening, what's the next step look like for you. And it's nice for that person to have a sounding board in me. It's also nice for me to have a sounding board of like, hey, if you got this kind of message, like how would you respond to that? And getting really sort of candid feedback from them, which is something that I think we all need. Um, but even in those conversations over the years, we have kids around the same age. So every time we connect, we compare notes on parenting and the madness of having tweens and teens. And so, that kind of thing adds a personal touch to it. And over the years, he's sent me a few referrals, one of which I was able to hire about 4 years ago. And I've helped him connect to some other companies and opportunities where I had contacts there. Because this is somebody I know. This isn't just a LinkedIn connection of mine. This is somebody I can speak to and say, hey, this is probably somebody you need to talk to, and here's why. There's that give and take that doesn't always need to result in an immediate hire, right? The second person is somebody I met roughly about 2 years ago. And in my initial messages, I called out some books that they had listed on their personal website. We both read them. And one of the books was an extremely influential book in my own personal development, my outlook on life in my probably early to mid 20s. So we probably spent the first 10 to 15 minutes talking about that book. And we didn't really dive into the interview right away, but we had this sort of personal connection about it. We talked about a book. It was almost like having a conversation over, about a book club. It made the rest of the conversation, the rest of the interview feel less interviewy. And I had a great fitting role for them. We moved on to the final stages. They called me probably 3 days before the final on-site loop, and they had to pull out. So their spouse was going to be running for public office in another state they were both originally from, and they were going to move back there. Um, and it really put the brakes on the whole interview process, which is a bummer. I had this great hiring manager who was really interested. We all thought everything was going to go smooth, but we agreed to keep in touch, and I kept a close eye on the election. I sort of looked at the primary dates. I set a reminder for, I think, maybe 3 days after the election. I sent some good vibe emails leading up to it, just kind of keeping in touch with what was going on in their world. So I had this reminder set for 3 days after the election to check in. But on election night at about 12:30 in the morning, I got an email from that person to let me know that their spouse won. And, it was really just a nice story to hear. We will cross paths again, and nobody stays in public office forever, right? So if that changes, our journey is on hold for a little bit, but the foundation for that is there for the long term. And I think that was sort of an impactful one for me to kind of connect my younger self with my current self, but also really sort of do that with this person who was going through, a pretty big change in their world. And the last one is more recent. This is actually this year. It was end of last year. I had this candidate who blew through the initial interviews, had to take themselves out of the consideration because of some family issues, and she voluntarily disclosed that she had a parent suffering with late stage Alzheimer's, and having gone through that with my own mother, I shared some of my experience with that and some resources around like, hey, here's some of the things you're going to need to think about as you go through this, things that were helpful to me and my family at the time. And I wanted to give them space, right? That's not going to be a quick and dirty process. It's a long, arduous process sometimes. So I wanted to give them some space, but set a reminder to check in maybe a little less than a year later just to see how it was going. Sent the message. We're in December now, so this was September, I think. The timing was exactly right. Um, she was ready to consider a new role, ready to get back into the fray of things. But I was able to leverage that experience, was able to leverage this sort of shared experience that we had together, plus the combination of that and their skills to find another great fitting role. And it actually resulted in us extending an offer a week ago. So really hopeful that that all goes through. But I think those kinds of things that go beyond the job description, that go beyond just sort of what are you looking for, those are the things we really want to, take into consideration. And again, you know, it's not always going to result in an immediate hire, and that's okay. Patience is a part of this game, but being top of mind when a situation changes or needs change, you cultivate that strong mutual connection with people. Um, that's what yields the results over time. So, as always, with pretty much any deck I have, it's going to end with this, and hopefully that's beneficial for you all. Thanks for making the time to be here today.